Hello and welcome back to Born to Rant. I'm Brandon, and this week we are diving deep into Hollywood history. We're going to be taking a look at the rise and fall of the pulp adaptations of the 1990s. Because in 1988, when Warner Brothers released the trailer for Tim Burton's Batman, this thing was explosive. It was one of the first times that people were buying tickets to movies just to go see a trailer for a completely different movie, something that feels incredibly antiquated today, but that's neither here nor there. After the immediate excitement for Burton's Batman, this caused all of the studios to put their thinking caps on and look to the past and see what they could maybe adapt that might be kinda sorta similar to Batman. But strangely enough, rather than looking to other superhero characters from the DC or Marvel stables, instead they looked to heroes that felt like they could more easily fall into the Art Deco and noir styles of Tim Burton's Batman. There was a real focus on adapting pulpy heroes that were either from or took place in the 30s or 40s, and for a little over half a decade we got a really interesting run of comic book movies that feel so completely different than the types of comic book movies that we get today. We're talking about movies that were unpoisoned by irony and instead focused on telling over-the-top stories set in over-the-top worlds that all felt inherently unique. We used to get movies that had their own unique, beautiful visual language, from the primary colors of Dick Tracy to the Universal Monsters-inspired world of Darkman, and the Rocketeer and Shadow's love of old Hollywood and noir lighting, to of course the jungle adventures of the Phantom. The 90s just really spoiled us with unique and visually engaging comic book movies, none of which were appreciated as much as they deserved to be upon release. Now, the majority of this video is a compilation of some older videos I made back when the channel first started, but this is now the only place you can see my full uncut video on The Rocketeer.
The Rocker who?
Long story short, upon uploading, it was immediately flagged for copyright, yet when I removed all mentions of the bad guys from World War II, it immediately passed copyright. If that happened to me now, I'd definitely fight it, but what can I say? This channel was less than 6 months old when I originally uploaded that video, and I just fully panicked. I've also made a few corrections and adjusted the audio level, so everything should be much more enjoyable to watch. And before we go any further, just a reminder that Born to Rant is a completely independent channel. Everything is written, recorded, and edited by me. No AI and no corporate backing. If that means anything to you, I'd appreciate it if you'd like and subscribe. And with all of that out of the way, I think it's time for us to dive deep into the world of 90s pulp adaptations, and what better place to start than with Warren Beaty's absolutely bonkers ode to the one and only Dick Tracy. Today we're here to talk about what just may very well be the weirdest comic adaptation of all time. A movie that wasn't afraid to put Oscar winners like Al Pacino and Dustin Hoffman in some of the most grotesque and insane makeup ever used in a movie. A movie that is unafraid of its source material and strives to replicate the look of 1930s comic strips as closely as it can. That's right, today we are talking about 1990's Dick Tracy. So Dick Tracy was directed by and stars Warren Beaty alongside Madonna, Al Pacino, and Dustin Hoffman, just to name a few. The movie also features a score by Danny Elfman, who was fresh off doing the Batman soundtrack, and boy can you hear it. And also features 5 original songs written by Broadway legend Stephen Sondheim, because this movie is secretly like 40% a musical. And seriously, this is not only one of the weirdest comic adaptations of all time, but one of the weirdest movies of all time. It feels completely detached from the era it was made in every single way. Dick Tracy was greenlit during the great Batman race of 1989. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, Hollywood is incapable of learning the correct lesson when a movie hits big. But what really sets Dick Tracy apart from all these other pulp hero movies of the early 1990s is the look of the movie. And that's primarily because Beatty insisted that the film stick with the same color palette used in the original comic strip, and focusing primarily on just 4 colors: red, green, blue, and obviously yellow. And Dick Tracy isn't the only comic book adaptation to try and imitate the style of its source material as closely as possible. I mean, just look at 300 and Sin City for examples. But because those movies rely so heavily on computer-generated backgrounds, they end up looking more like a video game than they do a traditional movie. And even though Zack Snyder and Robert Rodriguez essentially used Frank Miller's source material as their storyboards, neither of them even came close to replicating the pulpy beauty found within these comics. But Dick Tracy leans into it, playing with vibrant colors and moody noir-influenced lighting. So how did this movie come to be, and what is its legacy? The character of Dick Tracy was created in 1931 by Chester Gould, and he made his premiere in the pages of the Detroit Mirror and was quickly syndicated around the country to other newspapers. And I mean, the setup for the comic strip is pretty simple. Dick Tracy is a tough, smart, renowned detective, and he fights the mob in his city, going up against bad guys like Alphonse Big Boy Caprice, Flat Top, Pruneface, Lips Manless, and other silly named bad guys that also look as ridiculous as these motherfuckers do. Anyway, since his creation in 1931, Dick Tracy has gone through a number of iterations and adaptations, making his way from comic strips to comic books and novels and radio shows, a couple of film adaptations from RKO in the 1940s, and then finally, in 1990, we got Warren Beatty's masterpiece? Anyway, Beatty apparently had an idea for a Dick Tracy adaptation as far back as 1975, and from then until the movie was released, it was constantly shuffling through writers, directors, and stars. Just for the fun of it, here's a long list of people that were at one point attached to work on or in talks to work on Dick Tracy. Steven Spielberg, Martin Scorsese, John Landis, Clint Eastwood, Walter Hill, Joel Silver, Harrison Ford, Tom Selleck, and Mel Gibson. And in 1985, Warren Beaty finally just said fuck it and bought the rights to Dick Tracy himself from Tribune Media. Isn't that fucking crazy that we used to live in a time where not every character was owned by a major corporation? What's really crazy though is that to this day, Warren Beaty still holds the rights to Dick Tracy, and as recently as 2023, he was claiming that a sequel movie was in the works. So one of the most interesting things about Dick Tracy to me is one, how weird it is, and two, that it's essentially Warren Beaty working through his intimacy issues and deciding to leave the bachelor life behind him. For those that don't know, Warren Beaty was a well-known bachelor in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. He's been linked to over 100 female celebrities over the years. So Dick Tracy was released in 1990, and then in 1991, Beaty met and fell in love with Annette Bening. The two got married in 1992 and have been together ever since, and even have 4 kids together. Which is interesting when you consider that at its heart, Dick Tracy is really a movie about growing up and settling down and surrounding yourself with the people who care about you. And it's just really interesting to me that it was Dick Tracy of all movies that helped Beaty work through his issues and decide to settle down, especially when you consider that this movie also stars Madonna, who Warren Beaty was dating throughout all of production, and then the two promptly broke up after the movie was released. So anyway, in December of 1988, after Dick Tracy had been kicking around development hell for the better part of 15 years, Warner Brothers released a trailer for their upcoming summer tentpole, Batman, which shook all of Hollywood to its core. A new era was here, and this was the catalyst that finally got Disney to take Dick Tracy out of development hell and get the cameras rolling. And in February of 1989, Dick Tracy went into production with Warren Beaty starring and directing and working with his longtime cinematographer Vittorio Storaro, and a cast that included Al Pacino, Madonna, Mandy Patinkin, Paul Sorvino, Dick Van Dyke, Dustin Hoffman, and James Caan. And then, on June 15th, 1990, Dick Tracy was released into the world, and it did pretty okay. Roger Ebert even gave it 4 out of 4 stars. And on its $46 million budget, the movie grossed a worldwide total of nearly $163 million, which isn't a smash hit by any means, but it certainly wasn't a flop either. And reading some reviews for Dick Tracy when it first came out, it seems like the general consensus was that the art direction, matte paintings, and cinematography all elevated it to another level far above its more bare-bones screenplay. Alright, now that all of the background is done, let's talk about this fucking movie. There's honestly a lot to love about Dick Tracy. I've already talked a little bit about the color palette, but this movie opens loudly announcing that it's going to look a little different than most movies. This opening shot and sequence, I think, do a really great job of setting audience expectations of the visual language of the movie. Like, we open on the shot of Dick Tracy's gun, badge, and watch laid out before his radio with red trim, and then the camera tilts up to show us the radio in front of a wall that is also a deep red. No pattern, just red. And then we cut to a wide and see Dick Tracy leaving his apartment, and then the camera shows us the first beautiful matte painting of the movie, and all of this is telling us, hey, this movie is going to look and feel a little different. The shot composition alone feels like something straight from the pages of the comic strip, and that was fully Beaty's intention. His shots feel like panels, but panels where people live and move and breathe. As far as the plot of this movie goes, honestly, it's really not all that deep and not much happens in it. This is a movie that's almost entirely about the aesthetics and vibes. That being said, we pretty much immediately meet the kid, played by Charlie Korsmo, who would go on to be in Hook, one of my favorite Spielberg movies, and Can't Hardly Wait. And I was curious when making this video, so I pulled up his IMDb, and when you know it, he took a 20-year break from acting to become a lawyer and law professor before coming back in 2018 to be in 2 movies, both directed by his friend Aaron Schimberg, which are Chained for Life and A Different Man, both of which I still need to see. Now, where was I? Oh, right, the movie. Okay, so we meet the kid, and he sees a group of truly insane-looking thugs gunned down by 2 more insane-looking thugs, including my favorite thug in the entire movie, Flat Top. And they leave a message for Tracy on the wall in bullet holes. It's pretty fucking sick. Anyway, Tracy tracks down the kid as a witness and ends up kinda sorta adopting him with his girlfriend Tess Trueheart, played flawlessly by Glenn Headley. And she's clearly ready for Tracy to settle down with her, but also knows how seriously he takes his career, and after years of them being together, it's almost like she's given up hope that he'll ever be ready to settle down. We're also quickly introduced to Madonna's Breathless Mahoney and Paul Sorvino's Lips Manless, who is quickly tricked by our main baddie, Alphonse Big Boy Caprice, and ends up taking a cement bath before being dropped into the river. Which leaves Big Boy now in charge of Lips' club, and I guess he also gets Madonna in the deal. Okay, let's pause real quick and talk about Al Pacino as Big Boy for just a minute. First of all, this makeup is fucking incredible. And second, Pacino's performance here is like really strong. I mean, he was nominated for an Oscar for this role. Honestly, it kind of feels like he just dialed up Tony Montana a bit and leaned into his Italian accent instead of the Cuban accent he has in Scarface. Also, isn't it kind of interesting that Big Boy is based on Al Capone and Capone's nickname was Scarface? So that means Pacino has done 2 completely different versions of essentially the same character, but I digress. Okay, this is also where we're introduced to Dustin Hoffman as Mumbles, and while his makeup may not be as insane as the other mobsters, I fucking love his performance in this movie, and I just wanted to make sure I called that out because he's just a fun, silly character. Okay, so anyway, Big Boy takes over Lips' club and is trying to take over all the organized crime in the city, and we get this great scene of him teaching Breathless and several dancers a new routine for the club, and the whole sequence is hilarious and grotesque. Like, I just love how hard Al Pacino threw himself into this character and dialed it up to 11. And this is where Dick Tracy and Breathless Mahoney meet, but the sexual tension between these two is palpable. Remember how I said these two were dating at the time of filming? Then we're treated to a nice little montage of Tracy, Tess, and the kid. And I love how the kid keeps asking, Louis. And we get to see this nice little trio of a family begin to form. Really, this whole little montage is so wholesome and fun, and I think really does show that at this time, Beaty was beginning to mature a little bit. Like, you can kind of see the gears working in his brain and being like, being a family is kind of fucking awesome. Why don't I want my own family again? Anyway, then we get what is one of my favorite scenes of the movie. Big Boy Caprice has assembled all of the other mobsters in the city, and I mean, again, just look at this fucking set design and makeup. It's fucking incredible. But this whole scene kind of reminds me of the Five Family scene from The Godfather, which is ironic considering we've got Al Pacino and Jimmy Caan in the scene. And basically, this scene plays out exactly how you'd expect. Big Boy tells everyone what's up. Most everyone falls in line. Jimmy Caan doesn't and leaves, and his car blows up. So anyone that was thinking about not falling in line is now thinking twice. And with that out of the way, Big Boy now controls the entire city. Like I said earlier, this movie is fairly light on plot and story. From here, it's a back and forth of Big Boy trying to get Tracy out of the picture and Tracy doing his best to overcome everything Big Boy throws at him, but not before we're introduced to our secondary antagonist of the movie, No Face, who I have to imagine was a big influence on Steve Ditko when he created The Question for DC in the 60s, but I couldn't really find any concrete proof of this, so if you know anything about it, let me know in the comments. But anyway, No Face is a really interesting character because we're not really sure what their plan is, but we know they're shady. No Face exists primarily to play the two different sides against one another in an attempt to take over the criminal underworld for themselves. They frame Dick Tracy for murder, they frame Big Boy for kidnapping, and they want to seize power for themselves. And at the end of the movie, it's revealed that No Face has been Breathless Mahoney the entire time. And I think this is actually a really clever reveal, especially when you consider that Breathless is in love with Tracy, who has complicated feelings himself, but he knows his heart will always really belong to Tess, even though she catches him making out with Breathless, and that sucks, and he kisses her again at the end.
Move this man! Move!
So at the end of the day, Big Boy dies, No Face dies, and Dick Tracy gets the girl and the kid who's now going as Dick Tracy Jr. And I just love how this movie ends with Tracy fumbling over asking Tess to marry him as he's trying to leave and catch some bank robbers, and he just kind of throws her the ring box before walking out the door. Just feels pitch perfect for what this movie actually is. Like I said earlier, the movie is fairly light on plot and story. It really does feel like a comic strip that way. Every 15 minutes or so, there's a cliffhanger of some sort, and then we move on to the next section of the story. But what really makes this movie shine is the look of it. Like I said earlier, there aren't any other movies that look like Dick Tracy. From shot composition to the lighting to set decoration and makeup, there just aren't any other movies I can think of that went the extra mile to create something that felt so otherworldly, yet of our world. I mentioned Sin City earlier, and I do think that's probably the closest we've gotten to something like Dick Tracy, but again, so much of Sin City's backdrop is computer generated that when you put the two movies side by side, it's not even close. Dick Tracy blows it out of the water as far as looks goes. So 35 years later, what is the legacy of Dick Tracy? Well, I think it's largely forgotten. There hasn't been any attempt at a reboot because Warren Beaty still holds the rights and insists he's going to make a sequel. But I think for the folks that remember Dick Tracy, they remember it fondly. Even if they didn't love the movie, I bet they still think of the way it looks from time to time. I know I still do. Like I said, prior to working on this video, I hadn't seen this movie in at least 25 years. So it was almost like seeing it again for the first time. And I will think about some of the shots in this movie for as long as I live because they're just that cool and memorable. Now, as far as Warren Beaty still holding the rights to the character and wanting to make a sequel, since 1990, he has made 2 short specials with Turner Classic Movies, one in 2010, although it was shot in 2008, and one in 2023. Both of them, he comes in, he plays Dick Tracy, and is weirdly interviewed by Leonard Maltin. All of this is just to ensure that Warren Beaty can hang on to the rights just a little bit longer. Well, Warren Beaty is currently 88 years old, and while he seems to be in good health, I do wonder if he'll be able to finally pump out that sequel before his time on this earth comes to an end. What do you guys think? Would you be interested in a Dick Tracy sequel starring a nearly 90-year-old Warren Beaty? Would you like a reboot? Or should we just leave Dick Tracy be and leave this wonderfully strange movie as his final cinematic legacy? This week, we are here to talk about Sam Raimi's first attempt at a superhero movie. The movie that almost broke his friendship with Frances McDormand, and of course, the movie that gave us...
If you're not going to kill me, I have things to do.
That's right. Today, we are talking about how 1990's Darkman came to be, everything that makes it a cult classic, and its legacy over 30 years later. Now, Darkman is a movie that I didn't see until I was already a teenager, but I remember seeing the cover of the movie and the poster at many video rental stores throughout the 90s and 2000s. But it wasn't until I had already seen Raimi's Spider-Man trilogy completed and watched the Evil Dead movies that I finally put on Darkman. And I was instantly impressed by this movie. It just felt so different yet familiar, and in retrospect, that's clearly because Sam Raimi reused a lot of the ideas he had for Darkman throughout his Spider-Man trilogy, because the man is an economical director, and it's something I've always loved about him. I think one of the things that really makes Darkman work for me is the fact that it's closer to movies like The Shadow, The Rocketeer, The Phantom, and Dick Tracy than it is something like an Avengers movie. Honestly, Darkman has just as much in common with the Universal monster movies of the 30s and 40s as it does the pulpy action adventure of movies like The Shadow. Like, this shot of Liam Neeson alone really says it all. He's perched on the rooftop next to 2 gargoyle statues, and he's thinking about all of the horrible things going on in his life. It feels like the exact midpoint between something like The Hunchback of Notre Dame and Batman. But before I start waxing poetic about everything that I adore about Darkman, let's go back in time and learn a little bit about how this movie came to be. And the origins for Darkman start in a pretty likely place, The Shadow. Well, 1989's Batman 2, I suppose. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you've probably heard me talk about the great post-Batman trailer Gold Rush of 1989. Basically, after the trailer for Tim Burton's Batman was released in December of 1988, people started showing up to movies they didn't even want to see just to see the Batman trailer. And that instantly convinced all of the studios that they needed to create their own pulpy, Art Deco-inspired movies based on pulpy radio and comic characters from the 30s and 40s. And one of those movies put into development was The Shadow, which is owned by Universal, who also made Darkman. And after the release of Evil Dead 2, Universal really wanted to work with Sam Raimi, and he showed up to his first meeting with Universal and pitched them his version of The Shadow. Unfortunately for Raimi, and us I guess, Robert Zemeckis was already developing a movie based on The Shadow for Universal. And at this point in his career, Zemeckis was riding high off of the success of Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And Raimi knows a losing fight when he sees one, so he immediately just decided to give up on making that movie. And the thing that sucks about this is, even though I love Darkman and I love the version of The Shadow that we ended up getting, I would kill to see Sam Raimi's take on The Shadow. Like, if I could just hop over to a universe where that movie gets made and watch it once, I would be a very happy boy. Or even just give Sam Raimi the character now and let him make a movie based on The Shadow. That would be dope as hell too. Okay, enough about The Shadow. And that is exactly what Sam Raimi thought too, because he went away and decided to create his own superhero by using his favorite characteristics and tropes from other superheroes, and of course the Universal monster movies as well. Raimi even decided to take first crack at a draft for the screenplay, but it sounds like it ended up being more of a loose outline with more ideas than actual story beats. So he sat down with his two roommates, who happened to be Joel and Ethan Coen, and they helped him really bring structure to the story. And look, I love Sam Raimi. The Spider-Man movies are incredibly important to me, and the Evil Dead movies are some of the most inventive independent movies ever made. But I think that the lack of story in the Evil Dead movies does hurt them a bit. Evil Dead 2 especially feels less like a movie and more like a cartoon. And I love it, but my point is that storytelling, especially at this point in his career, was not Raimi's strong suit. And Universal agreed, because there are a total of 6 credited screenwriters on this movie, and that doesn't even include the Coen brothers. So after Raimi and the brothers' initial draft, Raimi brought on ex-Navy SEAL Chuck Farrer, who'd just written the movie Navy SEALs, to do the second draft. According to Sam Raimi, the Farrer drafts really helped bring the villains a lot more personality and made them stand out a bit more. It sounds like Durant collecting severed fingers was something that Raimi and Farrer really figured out together. However, at this point, the studio was still not satisfied with the script, so Raimi and his brother Ivan, who's a doctor, took another pass at the script, and Ivan was able to add in a lot of the medical jargon that we hear when Darkman is in the hospital. But again, the studio still wasn't happy, so they brought on brothers Daniel and Josh Golden to do a draft of the script. So finally, after 12 official drafts of the script, it was approved by the studio, and Darkman went into production with a budget of $14 million. As far as casting goes, originally Raimi really wanted his friend and previous leading man Bruce Campbell to play the lead role of Dr. Peyton Westlake. However, the studio just did not have faith in Campbell, somewhat of a recurring theme for his career, sadly. Bill Paxton was also really hoping to land the lead role, and he told his good friend Liam Neeson all about it, and well, that was a mistake because obviously the role ended up going to Neeson. As far as the character of Julie goes, apparently Julia Roberts was an early top contender for the role. However, she and Neeson had previously dated and broken up only a few months earlier. She actually came in and did a chemistry test reading with Neeson, and apparently at the end of the take, both of them had tears welling up in their eyes, and less than an hour later, Robert's agent would call and say it might be better if she not work on this movie. Thankfully, Sam Raimi was able to advocate for his good friend and previous roommate, Frances McDormand, to play the role. And I have to imagine this wasn't that hard of a sell, considering at this point in her career, McDormand had already been nominated for a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for her work in Mississippi Burning. As for the main villain of the film, Robert G. Durant, the role easily went to Larry Drake, who was primarily known for playing a more sympathetic character on LA Law. This was a nice change of pace for him, but I have to confess, I've never seen LA Law, and I mostly know Larry Drake from Darkman and as the dad from the opening scene of American Pie 2.
Natalie!
Darkman went into production on April 19th, 1989 and shot on location in LA, Santa Clarita, and Toronto. As for filming itself, there were a couple of fun anecdotes I found while doing research for the movie. The first is that Universal did not want this movie to look anything like the Evil Dead movies, so they forced Raimi to hire cinematographer Bill Pope, who had actually never shot a feature at this point in his career. And for those of you that don't know, Bill Pope would go on to shoot some of your favorite movies like The Matrix, Spider-Man 2, and Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. And the funny thing about that is that Raimi still used all of the same camera tricks he used on the Evil Dead movies. Apparently, it wasn't until day 50 of shooting that they locked the camera down on a tripod for the first time. time. But the shot ended up being a 360-degree pan, so the camera ended up still moving. Apparently, Raimi and McDormand also found it incredibly difficult to work together. Again, they had been roommates and were longtime friends. I think they were just too comfortable with one another, and McDormand has also said that this movie gave her a better feel for the movie-making process. And more than anything, it showed her the things that she did not want to do again in her career. Like, Julie really is the only damsel in distress type character in McDormand's filmography. As for Liam Neeson, he was also preparing to play a boxer in the movie The Big Man, and he would wake up at 3 a.m. every day to practice boxing and exercise. He'd then sit in a makeup chair for up to 5 hours and then film all day in makeup. God, that sounds exhausting. But the absolute best piece of behind-the-scenes lore for this movie comes from the post-production process. First of all, even though he wasn't allowed to be the leading man in the movie, Bruce Campbell was still hired to help with sound mixing in post and ended up doing a lot of ADR for a bunch of different characters in the movie, plus you can see him at the end in a brief cameo. As far as editing goes, this movie had a fascinating edit process, with the first edit of the movie getting a 62% score from test audiences, which caused Universal to panic and bring on a new editor, who would pump out a few different cuts of the movie, all more focused on turning it into a romance and not a pulpy comic book romp. But the funny thing is that every new cut of Darkman that Universal tested performed worse than the version that came before, which caused the studio to fully lose faith in the movie and do the dumbest thing I've ever heard and insist that the most recent version, which again had the lowest test score of any cut, be the version released to theaters. That is until producer Robert Tappert and editor Bob Morowski hatched a plan to completely re-edit the movie and reinsert all of the scenes and moments that test audiences hated, and restore the movie closer to the original cut that had been shown to test audiences, which again had the highest score of any of the cuts tested. So Tappert, Morowski, and Raimi spent 48 hours locked in the editing bay, completely re-editing Darkman from the ground up and locking the final cut. And when this version was shown to Universal, apparently the executive, Tom Pollock, had a nuclear meltdown and really screamed at both Sam and the Bobs. But they reminded him that the picture was locked, the sound mix was done, the negative had been cut, and critic screenings were in less than 48 hours. And wouldn't you know it, when Darkman was released on August 24th, 1990, it was #1 at the box office, making $8 million opening weekend against its $14 million budget, and Darkman would go on to make a domestic total of $33.8 million, making it an objective success for Universal and giving Sam Raimi his first #1 opening weekend of his career. Surprisingly, critics also quite liked Darkman, with many of them praising Sam Raimi for his understanding of the tone and style of the world he created for the movie. And with all of that out of the way, I think it's time we dive deep into Sam Raimi's Darkman and everything that makes it stick with us. The opening sequence of Darkman is one of the most fun opening sequences in any Sam Raimi movie. I might even take it over
pizza time.
We begin by overhearing Jesse Lawrence Ferguson's Eddie Black on the phone and yelling about a meeting he has coming up with someone trying to take over his turf. And I just love Ferguson's performance here. It's so silly and over the top, and combined with the ridiculous dialogue, it's just a good time. Our primary antagonist, Robert G. Durant, and his men show up to Eddie's for a meeting, and we get what I personally think is the best joke in the movie.
I was engaged to a girl once with a wooden leg.
Yeah? What happened?
Had to break it off.
Actually, that's not even true, because right after this, Smiley removes Skip's leg and reveals it to be a machine gun, and this entire action sequence is pure Raimi nonsense, and I mean that in the absolute best way possible. But nothing tops the aftermath of the shootout when Skip is hopping up and down and Smiley sticks his arm out for him to rest on. So stupid and funny, and I like that the sequence ends with Durant cutting off all of Eddie's fingers with his cigar cutter. It really creates some darkness for Durant and introduces us to his finger fetish. The movie then cuts to the main credits, which are of course excellent. The smoke and black letters with a red outer glow just look so cool and really capture the vibe of the movie well. We're also introduced to Danny Elfman's score, and Elfman was coming off doing the back-to-back scores for Batman and Dick Tracy. And his score here really follows that same vein, as would his Spider-Man score a decade later. After the credits, we're introduced to our main character, Dr. Peyton Westlake. Great comic book name, by the way, as well as his assistant, Yakatito, played by Nelson Machida. And the two are working on developing a synthetic skin that can be 3D printed via holograms, honestly weirdly ahead of its time. We learn that the two are working on this project, but for some reason, the synthetic skin will only hold its shape for 99 minutes before doing this cool bubbling effect and melting. I wonder if that time limit will come back into play later. Later that evening, we're introduced to Julie Hastings, Peyton's longtime girlfriend, and their relationship. We see how loving and playful they are together as they look through old photos on a slideshow. The next morning, Julie calls her boss to tell him about a document she found, the Belisarius Memorandum. And like a dummy, Peyton accidentally sets her coffee on top of the document, leaving a small coffee ring stain. I wonder if this will come back into play later. So Julie leaves to confront Louis Strack about the document that shows he's been bribing officials to get his new construction project underway, and strangely enough, he cops to the bribes immediately. He also warns her that criminals like Robert Durant may want the Belisarius Memorandum to undermine his efforts. He asks her for the document back, and she says she doesn't have it, having left it behind with Peyton for some reason. Cut to Peyton and Yakatito continuing their experiments, this time in the dark, which leads them to discover that their synthetic skin is in fact photosensitive and holds its shape better in the dark. And I really love the shot of Neeson monologuing in the dark about what makes the dark so effective for their skin. It's just a great shot. Unfortunately, Durant and his men show up looking for the Belisarius Memorandum, and I think this is my favorite sequence in the entire movie. First of all, the reveal of Durant's goons is just excellent. I love that Skip is still hopping up and down because Smiley is still using his machine gun leg. Like, why? I also love that Skip is still smiling like an evil lunatic while hopping. For my money, this is also where Bill Pope's cinematography really begins to shine. Like I said earlier, Darkman was the first film that Bill Pope worked on as a cinematographer, but he was no slouch either. At this point in his career, he'd already shot music videos for groups like Rod Stewart, The Bangles, and he even shot the video for Metallica's One, which is the best music video in Metallica's catalog. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong in the comments, but I'll just tell you you're wrong back. But seriously, Pope's cinematography here really brings the movie to life. Like I said, all of the goons are lit with spotlights, and because Peyton and his assistant were experimenting in the dark, it means that the entire lab has these great shadows, and I love these little off-screen flashes as Yakatito is getting the shit beat out of him. Plus, there's the way the camera goes from being a wide shot showing Peyton getting slammed into these glass cabinets to being Peyton's POV getting smashed into the glass cabinets to finally the glass cabinets POV as Peyton is getting smashed into them. The camera even tracks over as he's getting smashed into the cabinet. It's so stupid and funny, and again, for me, this is the sequence that makes this movie really click for me. Even the death of Yakatito is excellent. They put a bag over his head, and when Peyton begs them to let him breathe, and the only real reason I wanted to call this out is that I love how Ted Raimi plays this like it's the first time his character has ever killed anyone. The sequence ends with Peyton bloodied and burned, trying to make his way to the slider before his entire lab explodes. Unfortunately, he's a few seconds too late and he gets blown sky high, which gives us the best transition of the movie as Julie watches the building burn to standing at the cemetery by herself mourning Peyton's death. Feels very comic book. Meanwhile, we find that Peyton did in fact survive the explosion and his body is covered in severe burns. And we get this burn doctor explaining the experimental procedure they've performed on him, allowing him to be free of the pain from his burns, but this comes with the side effect of amplified rage and strength, a great combination. Plus, we also get this cool little CGI shot of Peyton's DNA being affected, which Raimi would use again in Spider-Man. So as the doctors talk about the burn victims, Peyton awakens and breaks out of the hospital and tries to find Julie, only to discover how horribly burned and disfigured he now is. Once Darkman understands his situation, he finds an abandoned building and begins rebuilding his lab. Kind of like Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2, but now that Darkman has established himself a lab, it's time for him to do some light stalking of Julie, which luckily brings Durant and Rick into sight as well. And I love the scene of Darkman torturing Rick in the sewer and then sticking his head through the manhole cover here. This is pure uncut Raimi. So now that Darkman has spoken to Rick, he develops a revenge plan that will get him all the funding he needs to complete his lab and complete his work on the synthetic skin so that he can get his life back. The first part of Darkman's plan involves the henchman Paulie and his routine of picking up money at a local deli. So Darkman makes himself a Paulie face, knocks Paulie out, plants 2 plane tickets for Paulie and Rick in the apartment, then goes to the deli as Paulie and steals the money. This of course doesn't make Durant very happy, so he orders Paulie thrown out his window, and you guys, this is such a cool stunt. Like, this is clearly a stuntman and not a dummy, doing 99% of this fall. We then get this awesome shot of Darkman brooding next to a couple of stone gargoyles, followed by him having a full-blown mental breakdown in his lab. But after his breakdown, Darkman is finally able to take on the persona of Peyton once again, and his first order of business is seeing Julie, who's happy to see him but is also understandably incredibly freaked out. But the two are able to more or less reconcile. However, Peyton is obviously only able to see her for 90 minutes at a time, making things extra complicated. It's then time for the next part of Darkman's plan, which sees him dressing as Durant and killing a convenience store worker before turning to the camera and announcing his name. This leads to the real Durant quickly being arrested, while Darkman makes his way to Hung Fat to collect more of Durant's cash. So once Darkman makes his escape with Durant's cash, he meets up with Julie for what I would say is probably the most iconic scene in the movie, with Peyton trying to win a stuffed pink elephant at a carnival, but when the carnival worker refuses to give it to him, Peyton snaps and breaks the worker's fingers before saying,
"Take the fucking elephant,"
and running away. However, this time Julie decides to follow him and finds his lab and tries to comfort Darkman, but he's not ready to accept himself or Julie's love. She then goes to break things off with Strack, who she's been kinda sorta seen since Peyton died, and on his desk, she happens to see a document with a little coffee stain on it, and oh my god, it's the Belisarius memorandum. It turns out that Durant has been working for Strack the entire time. Once Julie leaves, she immediately goes back to Darkman's lab. Unfortunately, Strack had Durant and his men follow her and kidnap her right outside of the lab so that Darkman can see she's been taken, which leads to the most over-the-top action sequence in the movie, with Durant firing a grenade launcher at Darkman and his lab. But Darkman uses his masks of the various thugs to trick and murder them before finally blowing up his lab to take out Smiley, the same way that they blew up his lab before. Darkman goes after Durant, but ends up dangling from a cable from the helicopter as it flies through the city. But Darkman gets the upper hand when he lands on a semi and attaches the cable to it, causing the helicopter to crash, killing Durant. Well, until the sequel. With Durant out of the way, Darkman goes to meet Strack and save Julie, and he shows up wearing a Durant mask, which Strack figures out pretty much immediately. And this final set piece in the construction site high up on scaffolding is just great imagery. After some fun monologuing and back and forth between Darkman and Strack, Darkman finally gets the upper hand and accepts that he is no longer Peyton Westlake. He's no longer human, he is Darkman, and he drops Strack to his death. Julie immediately runs to Darkman, telling him she doesn't care about the scars, she just wants to be with him, but Darkman isn't ready for something like this, so he disappears into the crowd and puts on Bruce Campbell's face. It's a pretty sick way to end the movie, if I'm being honest. So, 35 years later, what is the legacy of Sam Raimi's Darkman? Well, I think it's one of the most beloved movies in his filmography. Sure, it doesn't have the same cult following as the Evil Dead movies, and it certainly isn't in the pop culture lexicon the same way the Spider-Man movies are, but Darkman certainly has its fans. Obviously, the big legacy with Darkman is that it was Raimi's first swing at doing a superhero movie, and it really is crazy just how much it has in common with his Spider-Man movies, while also capturing a completely different tone and story. Darkman is not a story about great power coming with great responsibility. It's a monster movie where the hero accepts his fate as a monster. This was also the first #1 opening weekend of Raimi's career, something he would go on to do several more times. And there were even 2 Darkman sequels made, though they were both direct-to-video and are almost entirely devoid of any of the original cast and crew, except for Larry Drake, who would star in Darkman 2, The Return of Durant. And there was also Darkman 3, Die Darkman Die, which really is just an excellent title. There was also a Darkman TV show that was in the works in the early 90s, but the pilot that was made was so bad that the entire project was canceled. In the last few years, Liam Neeson has been asked a few times about returning for a proper Darkman sequel, and he's said that he'd be willing to at least read a script and consider it, but there hasn't been any real news aside from that. Personally, I don't need a Darkman Legacy sequel. If it was directed by Sam Raimi, sure, I'd be interested and probably end up seeing it, but I'd really rather Sam Raimi worked on something new and different. Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today we are here to talk about a movie that makes me unironically want to say, wow, they just don't make them like that anymore. An optimistic comic book movie unpoisoned by Buffy Speak-inspired Marvel movies, a movie that feels completely out of time in every single way. Today, we're talking about 1991's The Rocketeer.
The Rock of who?
Directed by Joe Johnston and based on the 1982 graphic novel of the same name by Dave Stevens, The Rocketeer was released on June 21st, 1991. And you guys, I'm not gonna lie, I absolutely love this movie. I might even call it a perfect movie. It's got a near perfect screenplay. Every actor knows exactly what movie they're in. It looks incredible. I mean, just look at this lighting. And it has what is, for my money, the best score in all of conductor James Horner's filmography. But let me know if you disagree in the comments. And in rewatching The Rocketeer, the thing that struck me the most about it was just how optimistic and how out of time it felt. Even by 1991 standards, this movie wasn't fitting in with the times. This is a movie that refuses to make fun of itself. That's not to say it doesn't have jokes, it's got plenty of them, but the jokes are never at the expense of the movie. There's not a single moment where some big thing happens and a character turns to another and says, well, that just happened, or some variation of it. Which is just a refreshing change of pace to go back and revisit and escape into a world where a boy solves all of his problems by strapping a rocket to his back and doing crazy stunts, and in the end, he saves the day, he gets the girl, he gets a new plane and a new rocket. The good guys win and the bad guys go up in flames. What's not to love? But before we get too deep into what I love about this movie, let's briefly break down the movie's plot and discuss how it came to be. In The Rocketeer, we follow stunt pilot Cliff Secord, played by Billy Campbell, and his mentor / mechanic Peavy, played by the always wonderful Alan Arkin, as they find a mysterious rocket and have to work to avoid the FBI, the Mafia, a Nazi sympathetic actor, and Howard Hughes. Shout out to my boy John Locke as Howard Hughes. Never tell Locke what kind of plane he can build. Anyway, things really kick into gear when Cliff decides to use the rocket to save his friend Malcolm, who's lost control of the plane he's flying. And you guys, sure, some of the graphics and effects here look pretty dated. But also, you can't tell me that these stunts aren't still cool to watch in 2025. After Cliff saves Malcolm, he's dubbed the Rocketeer by the press, which of course leads to everyone looking for the Rocketeer, and more importantly, the rocket that's strapped to his back. Howard Hughes uses the FBI to try and track them down, and our main antagonist, the Nazi sympathetic actor Neville Sinclair, played by Timothy Dalton, he's got the Mafia trying to track them down. All of this leads to Cliff's girlfriend Jenny being kidnapped by Sinclair, and Cliff being determined to rescue her. But don't think that Jenny is just some generic damsel in distress. Jennifer Connelly plays Jenny, and even at age 20, she fucking knocks this thing out of the park. The script went through a lot of changes in pre-production, and Jenny's character was one of the biggest changes. See, in the comics, Cliff's girlfriend is named Betty Page. Yeah, like that, Betty Page. And in the comics, Betty is a pinup model. And for obvious reasons, Disney was not a fan of this idea. That and Page wouldn't release her likeness for the film anyway. So instead, Betty was changed to Jenny, and Jenny became a struggling actress. But the reason I bring this up is because it was a mandate that Jenny not feel like a damsel in distress, that she could hold her own, and I love that about her. I mean, she knocks a dude over the head with a statue while seducing him, and this entire movie culminates with Jenny and Cliff fighting Nazis on a Nazi airship that's engulfed in flames. I told you, this movie fucking rocks. So, how did this movie come to be? Well, the character was created in 1982 by Dave Stevens, and then the story was stuck in development hell from 1983 to 1990. Gee, I wonder what could have happened to finally get this movie made.
I'm Batman.
Anyway, Joe Johnston signed on to direct in late 89, and by late 1990, they were in production with Industrial Light and Magic handling the effects. On its $35 million budget, sadly, The Rocketeer only grossed about $45 million worldwide, which isn't quite a flop, especially in 1991 with the video market exploding, but it wasn't enough to justify a sequel either, which honestly I'm thankful for in retrospect. Though they did bring back Billy Campbell to voice Cliff for a Rocketeer animated show that Disney Plus did back when that first launched. It's very clearly a kid's show though, so I haven't watched it, but I'm sure it's fine. So why do I love The Rocketeer so much? I'm glad you asked. This movie, much like The Shadow, this was a childhood favorite of mine. And I still watch it every couple of years, and every single time I'm blown away by not only how well it's held up, but just how overwhelmingly good it is, both as a movie and the content feels so wholesome, like a nice warm blanket. There's so many things that work about this movie. The script is a big part of that. I'd say this movie has a near perfect structure. Every beat is set up flawlessly and then paid off flawlessly. The biggest example of this is when Cliff and Jenny go to the movies in the first act and we see a news serial talking about a Nazi airship that's doing a tour of the US to promote, quote, world peace. And wouldn't you know it, the last stop on this tour is Los Angeles, where our movie just so happens to take place. And I've already said it, but our big third act set piece takes place on that airship. But this movie opens up beautifully, with Peavy and the crew prepping what looks like a brand new plane for a flight. I love the way these barn doors open, and again, the entire score to this opening sequence is just incredible. Cliff hops in the plane, and it sets up several things immediately. Number one, that these guys have spent all of their time and money restoring this plane. Number 2, that they hope to get into nationals with the plane. Number 3, that Cliff has a good luck ritual of sticking chewing gum on whatever he's flying. Number 4, he has to have a picture of Jenny in the cockpit to kiss for good luck. And number 5, we get to see Cliff and Peavy's relationship, and we know they're not father and son, but it's clearly the dynamic of their relationship. And then we cut to a car chase on the ground. We've got 3 cars and a shootout going on. We don't know what's happening or why, but this is a great way to break up the shots of Cliff flying the GB plane for the first time. Anyway, during the chase, for whatever reason, one of the mafia guys decides to shoot at Cliff's plane, which fucks everything up and means that Cliff will have to make an emergency crash landing. I really like how he punches out the cockpit window here. I mean, this entire sequence is blocked and shot perfectly. We understand absolutely everything that's happening and how bad it is for our main characters. I especially like when Peavy and Cliff try and confront the FBI about their plane and asking who's going to pay for it, and the agents are being fucking dicks, so Cliff just straight up punches the FBI agent. Bring back good guys punching federal agents in movies. I'm here for it. So later on, Peavy and Cliff discover the stashed rocket and do a quick test on a statue before really trying it out. And this test sequence is so fun and silly. Like, they use a hacksaw to cut the statue down and then tie the statue to a string and start up the rocket. My favorite part of this sequence is after the rocket has broken free and we cut to a shot of Cliff and Peavy looking at the camera, and we can see the rocket coming from miles away behind them. I just really like the way the rocket gets closer and closer and they don't notice it till it's almost too late, and then they duck and it flies over them and it crashes. Then we see the head of the statue is all banged up. Great. So anyway, later that night, Cliff picks up Jenny for their date, which ends at the Bulldog Cafe, a small diner out by the airstrip, and we immediately get the feeling that this is routine for them. They go to a movie, then they come to the diner, and then Cliff takes her home. It's the same thing every week. And we get the feeling that everyone in this diner is a family. They all love and care about one another, and Jenny is included in that. But it's also very clear that Jenny wants more for herself. She adores these people, but she wants the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. She asks Cliff about going somewhere else next time, and he kind of scoffs it off, and she tells him when he wins nationals, he has to take her to this fancy club. And all of this leads to Malcolm accidentally revealing to Jenny that Cliff lied to her about how the test flight went. He said it went well, but the landing had a few bumps, but the plane almost blew up and Cliff almost died. And upon hearing this from Malcolm, Jenny storms out of the diner. And I really like how after Jenny storms off, Millie, the diner owner, says, "We'll go after her, you dope." And it's not played as a joke. I mean, it's funny, but not in a wow, you did not just say that cheesy line kind of way. But because Cliff is acting like an idiot by not going after Jenny, and it's funny that Millie has to point that out to him. And then after this dinner scene, we get my favorite line reading from Alan Arkin in this movie, when Cliff says, "What do you know? You haven't been on a date since 1932. And I just love this line he gives.
Flora Maxwell. There was no point in dating nobody after her.
The next day, we get to see Jenny at work, and I love the idea that Cliff was able to just walk onto this closed set without anyone stopping him. Also, whoever didn't properly build this set needs to lose their job, because my boy Cliff wasn't even touching that fucking wall when it fell. And even if he was, he never should have been able to knock it over. And this is where we also meet our antagonist, Neville Sinclair. And I don't think there's anyone on this earth who's better at playing overtly charming and overtly evil at the drop of a dime. I mean, the way this guy turns his charm on, I'm not sure many people could resist him. So Neville fires Jenny because of Cliff knocking over the set, but then overhears Cliff tell her about a rocket he found, and then after that, Neville is very interested in Jenny and starts laying on the charm and asks her out to dinner. And honestly, I love all of the scenes with Neville Sinclair. Timothy Dalton just absolutely crushed this role, and Jennifer Connelly holds her own in every scene with him. I love when they finally do go out to dinner at the fancy club, and she starts crying after they dance just because she's so incredibly overwhelmed by everything. And oh, hey look, it's Jan from The Office. But seriously, Sinclair is doing everything he can to sweep Jenny off her feet, and more importantly, trying to get her to tell him everything he can get out of her about Cliff. And while all of this is happening, the Mafia have shown up to the Bulldog Cafe, right as Cliff was about to call the FBI to confess that they have the rocket. This is a fun, tense scene because they're looking for Cliff, but they don't know what Cliff looks like, and Cliff is right there in the diner. And right as they figure it out, Cliff, Peavy, and the rest of the diner take the Mafia goon out, and Cliff leaves to save Jenny. After arriving to the club, Cliff pretends to be a waiter, and we get the infamous soup scene. And this is one of my favorite set pieces of the movie. I love how once the action kicks in, Cliff is aimlessly flying around the club, and I love when he accidentally closes this big-ass prop seashell. It's just a really funny image that always sticks with me. Oh, and I haven't even mentioned Lothar yet. Lothar might actually be my favorite character in the movie. He definitely has my favorite introduction in the movie. I just love the soft colored lighting and the fact we don't see his face, only hear his deep, creepy voice, and he's immediately such an imposing presence. Like, we get this great scene at Peavy and Cliff's place where Lothar breaks in, and neither Peavy or Cliff are able to even remotely subdue him. It takes like 15 cops firing Tommy guns into the house to make Lothar flee, and he doesn't even get hit. He also folds a dude in half at one point. It's pretty sick. Okay, back to the club scene. So this is where Jenny gets kidnapped, and her entire interaction with Neville post-kidnapping is probably my favorite scene in the movie. The characters are both doing some of the best acting of their lives, with Neville trying to seduce Jenny and Jenny playing along until she can find a way out. Like, you fully buy that she's into this dude right up until the moment she smashes this statue over his head and gives one of the best lines of the entire movie.
I finally played a scene with Neville Sinclair.
And this is where we get the big reveal that Neville is actually a Nazi spy as Jenny breaks into Neville's secret room and finds a radio dialed into a German frequency and other fun Nazi propaganda. And while all of this is happening, Cliff and Peavy are finally taken in by the FBI and are introduced to Howard Hughes. And here is where Cliff and Peavy are shown this goofy cartoon supposedly made by the Nazis to showcase their plans for the rocket once they get a hold of it. I like how people are so obsessed with this rocket, but realistically no one can fucking fly it. Even Cliff has trouble with it throughout the movie. And anyway, all of this culminates at the Griffith Observatory, with Neville wanting to trade Jenny for the rocket. And here is where we get the single best line in this movie, where Cliff and Jenny reveal to Eddie Valentine, our main mobster, that Neville is in fact a Nazi. And to this, Eddie says,
I may not make an honest buck, but I'm 100% American. And I don't work for no two-bit Nazi.
Hell yeah, Eddie. I'm so here for it. And this leads to this really great moment with the FBI and the Mafia teaming up to shoot at the Nazi plane. And I love this little moment where Eddie catches this FBI guy next to him and they're both shooting at the Nazis and he kind of stops and smiles. It's just a really cute scene. And finally, we get our grand finale on the Nazi airship. And we get this excellent hero shot of Cliff in the Rocketeer outfit holding a gun in front of the American flag. But the finale on the airship is great. I like how Cliff tries to punch Lothar in the balls and it just doesn't work. I like that Jenny gets to kill a Nazi here. And remember when I said earlier that the script sets up and pays everything off perfectly? Yeah? How about when I said that Cliff has to put chewing gum on whatever he's flying for good luck? Well, what I didn't mention is that at some point the rocket gets shot and begins leaking fuel, which Peavy uses Cliff's lucky chewing gum to cover up as a quick fix. Well, Cliff removes this gun just before handing the rocket over to Sinclair, which causes him to blow up after he tries to fly away with the rocket. There's a lot to love about the Rocketeer. Like I've said multiple times now, it just feels of a different era. It's more of an adventure film from the 30s than even the Indiana Jones movies are. Like, compared to the Rocketeer, Raiders of the Lost Ark plays like a parody of 30s adventure movies. And the cinematography in this movie is just absolutely incredible. Cinematographer Hiro Narita just absolutely nails the look of this movie. It's bright and fun, and the night scenes all have this subtle colored lighting to add just a little something extra to the scenes. It never goes crazy with it. The lighting always feels very subtle and subdued, but if you're looking for it, you'll be blown away by just how beautiful it is. So, over 30 years after being released, what is this movie's legacy? Is it remembered fondly? Honestly, not really. I know a few years ago, Red Letter Media did a review on this movie, so I'm sure that helped many more people finally sit down and watch it. But like they say in their review, The Rocketeer is kind of geared towards a specific audience. Like, you couldn't show this to a modern teenager raised on MCU films and have them enjoy it. Sure, this movie has some incredible stunts, but action sequences have evolved so much over the past 30 years that it just barely plays as action. The idea of a guy falling out of a plane, kinda boring when Captain America jumps out of planes with no parachute for fun. Although I'm realizing in typing this up that even that Captain America reference is from an 11-year-old movie at this point. For me, this movie's legacy just reminds me of a simpler time, a time when movies weren't poisoned by irony and quips or completely grim and dark, filled with gritty realism. I love that this movie story is so black and white. The good guys are the good guys and they always do the right thing, and the bad guys are the Nazis who always, without fail, are doing the wrong thing. It's really nice to see our hero beat the bad guys, get the girl, get a new plane and a new rocket, teasing a sequel but not necessarily setting one up either. The Rocketeer just tells a complete story and it's under 2 hours long. What more could you ask for now that we live in a world where every comic book movie stretches past the 2-hour mark and has a mandate from the studio to definitely set up a sequel and or cinematic universe? So The Rocketeer might not be the most popular movie ever made. Hell, it's one I'm sure most people have forgotten about at this point, but those of us that saw it in the 90s or as kids will always have a soft spot for it because, like I said earlier, it's a pretty perfect movie. Like, truly, I don't have a single complaint about it. The screenplay is perfect. The performances match the tone of the movie perfectly. Joe Johnston's vision matches the source material, Hiro Narita understood the assignment and made this movie look incredible, and James Horner's score just brings it all together. Today, we're going to talk about one of my childhood favorites, a movie I loved almost as much as Tim Burton's Batman, 1994's The Shadow. And all of this made me want to revisit The Shadow to see if it held up at all, and mostly just to remind myself how good movies used to look. So with that out of the way, let's talk about 1994's The Shadow, starring Alec Baldwin, Tim Curry, Penelope Ann Miller, John Lone, Peter Boyle, and Ian fucking McKellen. That's right, before he was Magneto, he was Dr. Reinhardt Lane, a colorblind physicist. You know what? It's still cool. It's still cool. And it was directed by Russell Mulcahy, whose filmography is spotty at best. But more importantly, this movie was written by David Koepp. You know, the guy that wrote Death Becomes Her, Carlito's Way, the first Mission Impossible movie, the first Spider-Man movie, and motherfucking Jurassic Park. Now, he's also got some stinkers in his filmography, don't get me wrong, but we're gonna put some respect on the man's name. This movie also got fairly mixed reviews. Although, I did learn that Roger Ebert actually gave this movie a pretty positive review, and I agree with what he says here. The story itself may not be so mesmerizing, but who really cares? Style and tone are everything with a movie like this. And that is exactly how I feel about The Shadow. The basic premise for this movie is we've got Lamont Cranston, who was living as a ruthless opium drug lord in Tibet after World War I. Long story short, he gets abducted by a holy man who tells him he's going to change his ways and use his fortune for good. So Lamont moves back to New York to fight crime as the Shadow, who has the power to cloud men's minds, aka he can control people with his mind and make them see what he wants them to see. Pretty simple. It's Batman plus telepathy and guns. My boy loves his guns. And if you didn't know, the Shadow was actually a big inspiration for both Bill Finger and Bob Kane when they created Batman, so the ties are there. So my history with this movie stretches all the way back 30 years ago to the year 1995 when my mom brought this movie home on VHS. I think she always had a crush on Alec Baldwin. I mean, how could you not? Just look at this guy. But anyway, I remember she came home with it and told me it was called The Shadow, and based on the name, I fully thought it was going to be a horror movie, something I did not like as a 5-year-old. But she told me with one phrase, he's kind of like Batman. Boom. I was fucking in, and I've probably seen this movie between 30 and 50 times in my life. It was a movie I would just rewatch as a kid. It was on regular rotation along with Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, Batman 1989, and Star Wars. I had no problem watching this movie on repeat. And in retrospect, it's kind of crazy that my mom let me watch this so young, considering it opens with someone being murdered in a drug dispute. For context, my mom made me buy edited CDs until I became a teenager. All of this to say, it wasn't until I became an adult that I learned this movie was a bomb, and not really loved at all by people, so I was kind of embarrassed for my love for it for a long time, and it wasn't until rewatching earlier this week that I realized this movie kind of fucking slaps, and I think people really should give it another try, or a first try if they've never seen it. I'm not saying it's perfect. It's got plenty of problems, but the things that The Shadow does right far outweigh the times that it feels clumsy and or outdated. I mean, just look at this fucking movie. It looks incredible, and I'm not just saying that because it was shot on 35mm film. Look at the lighting. They had a specific noir vibe they wanted to capture, and they absolutely nailed it. Plus, look at all of these amazing sets they built. Is there some incredibly clunky and outdated CG throughout this movie? Yes, absolutely. Without fucking question. But I think if you can look past that even a little bit, I think you'll see that this movie just fully fucking works. One of the things I admired in my rewatch is that this movie covers the origin of our lead in the first 10 minutes. We see our protagonist at his absolute worst. He's a brutal drug lord that murders at will. He seems to love being evil and has no desire to change. That is, until he's forced to. We see him abducted, and we see him arrive at a temple where he's forced to confront his own black heart. Here, he's redeemed, and then he sets off on his mission to beat up bad guys. Boom. Full origin, 10 minutes, perfectly executed. Now, this movie does take full advantage of the magical Asian trope, but that's been a problem with comics since the very beginning. But I do like that they chose to have the Tulku not have some thick accent or speak in broken English. Now, it would have been better if they had him speak in Tibetan or Mandarin, but it was 1994, we'll take what we can get. Side note, I wonder if Chris Nolan took any inspiration from this movie when making Batman Begins. It's not like a one-to-one or anything, but we've already covered how influential The Shadow was on the creation of Batman as a character. But I mean, both movies do have the origin of our hero going into a temple hidden in the mountains where they're forced to confront their own intentions and then become the heroes they were meant to be. Again, not one-to-one, but I just wonder if Nolan likes this movie. And I'll just say it, for me, this is peak Baldwin. I've always thought he was fucking great in this movie, although in rewatching it, there were a couple of line readings where I swear to God I heard the beginning of Jack Donaghy coming through. I also really like how this movie handles him clouding people's minds and influencing them. It uses this really hard noir style lighting. I feel like if this movie were made today, we'd have some CG animation showing how his powers work or something stupid as fuck like that, but instead we just get this really simple in-camera trick. I do love the way his eyes also change color throughout the movie when he leans in to cloud people's minds. I just think Baldwin absolutely nails this role. He's quick-witted and charming. He looks like $1 billion. For my money, this is peak Baldwin. But the other actors in this movie are no slouches either. Jonathan Winters is kind of hilarious as Lamont's uncle, who also happens to be the police captain. There's this running gag that these two have dinner together all the time, and every time they get together for dinner, Lamont is an hour late and he barely apologizes, and it kind of gets funnier every time. John Lowe is an absolute joy to watch as this movie's villain, Shiwan Khan, the last remaining descendant of Genghis Khan, even though there are still hella Genghis Khan descendants out there today. But seriously, I think he does a great job of playing an absolute madman drunk with his own power. I really like the chemistry that he and Baldwin have together in their scenes as well. They play this kind of cat and mouse game really, really well. Khan makes it clear that he's a great admirer of Yin Ko, which was Lamont's name when he was a drug lord in Tibet, and he believes that Yin Ko is Lamont's true nature. And I just really love how hard Khan tries to bring that out of him. Penelope Ann Miller plays Lamont's love interest and our second lead, Margot Lane. Her whole thing is she's beautiful, but people see her as kooky, but Lamont knows she also has the same abilities that he does. And I think she's doing a really solid job in this movie. She and Baldwin have some strong chemistry. I specifically like this moment where he tells her that he's psychically well endowed, and she looks right at his dick and says, "I bet you are." Then you've got Ian McKellen as her dad and Tim Curry as his assistant, who's fully obsessed with Margot and is definitely a sex pest of some sort, but they're both giving top-notch performances. I mean, everyone loves when Tim Curry laughs, and he's got an all-time great laugh at the end of this movie. I love the way his mouth is foaming from his laughter like the dude has fully lost his mind. And Sir Ian McKellen doesn't get much screen time in this movie, but he's great in every scene. His whole shtick is that he's an absent-minded genius who gets lost in his top-secret government research. And look, the story in this movie isn't bad either. Like, Shiwan Khan is a pretty solid villain. He's evil and he fucking loves it. And oh, hey, it's the guy that has the dream about Winkies from Mulholland Drive. This poor guy. He's just always getting killed in things. Anyway, it's clear that Lamont and Khan are two sides of the same coin. One light, one dark, etc. It's just a well-done conflict. There are plenty of things to pick apart in this movie. Like, why the fuck does Alec Baldwin all of a sudden have Daniel Baldwin's face whenever he transforms into the Shadow? But I'm not really interested in picking this movie apart, although that does really bug me. For me, the thing that makes a movie special are the little moments. The moments that make you crack a quick smile, the moments that stick with you after you finish watching the movie. So here are some of my favorite little moments from The Shadow. I like how Peter Boyle lip syncs to the Shadow speech here like he hears it multiple times a week. I also really like the underground network of informants and how widespread it is. We get a couple of scenes where people are notified and it's like laughably expansive. Also, this song that plays when Lamont first enters the club is a goddamn bop, and it gets stuck in my head every single time I watch this movie.
You're some kind of mystery.
The Shadow also does a great job of using throwback future tech. This is supposed to take place in the years between World War I and II, and I think this movie does a great job of capturing what this kind of technology would have looked like in that era. I mean, Alec Baldwin straight up FaceTimes with a dude through what looks like an old radio. It's pretty fucking sick. Speaking of the tech in this movie, everything with McKellen fully works. I love his generic lab space filled with beakers and coils and him hunched over fiddling on just one thing with two guards out front arguing about what to get for dinner. Plus, look at this sick billboard blowing smoke rings. Apparently something like this actually existed in New York at one point. God, bring back cool smoking ads. I don't even smoke, I just think they look cool. And I like what we're gonna call his Chekhov's colorblindness that comes up multiple times and is the key to saving everyone at the end of the movie. Like, it's a little lame that Margot's big thing she gets to do to save the day is remember the difference between red and green. Sure, but also, this is a silly pulpy movie. Also, in rewatching this movie, I noticed this henchman, who's definitely a white dude by the way, but when I looked him up, I learned that this guy's name is Nils Allen Stewart, and he's a stunt coordinator and actor with like 200 plus credits to his name. And embarrassingly, I recognized him from the movie Double Dragon, where he plays Bo Abobo. This has nothing to do with anything, I just wanted you all to know how big of a fucking nerd I am that I looked up the career of a stunt coordinator while doing research for this video, because I recognized him from another bad movie that I really loved as a kid. Okay, back on track. I mentioned earlier that Baldwin and Lone had great chemistry together, and I think these couple of scenes where they talk throughout the movie are just fantastic. First of all, the product placement gag is hilarious.
Lovely tie, by the way. May I ask where you acquire it?
Brooks Brothers.
For context, The Shadow was a radio show in the 30s and they would do in-show product placement like this, and I think it's just hilarious. I also love the way Khan flips him this coin and the way it spins for like way too long in the air. Speaking of coins, Lamont takes the coin that Khan flips at him to his scientist friend, and they talk about making an atomic bomb in theory, and it's just funny the way they talk about it, because remember, this movie is taking place long before Oppenheimer and the completion of an atomic bomb. This is pure theory. But it's their second to last confrontation in the restaurant that really stands out. Like, Khan is too busy monologuing about Lamont's true nature to notice that Lamont is using his powers to get Khan's guard to give him his gun, and then when they shoot at each other and the bullets collide, come on! It's sick as fuck. Anyway, the Texas switch they do with Baldwin and Lone wearing a Baldwin face mask is so fucking cool and clever. It looks so much better than it has any right to look too. It just goes so hard. And finally, the entire finale of this movie fucking rocks. They're in this massive, cool Art Deco like hotel that appeared out of nowhere, and it's just endless cool set piece after endless cool set piece. I will forever be disappointed to have learned that this finale in the Hall of Mirrors was originally supposed to be much longer and include flashbacks of Lamont's most evil moments as Yin Ko, but unfortunately their entire set was destroyed after an earthquake. Thanks a lot, LA. Look, The Shadow is by no means a perfect movie, but it undeniably feels like a real movie, which is more than I can say for most modern superhero movies. Like, just look at scenes from this movie compared to the Captain America and Superman trailers we've gotten over the last month or so. One of these looks like a movie, and the others look like they still need to be color corrected properly. It is sad to know that the legacy of this movie is that it mostly doesn't have one, although Shout Factory did issue it on Blu-ray in the past couple of years, and it includes new interviews with Russell McCaughey, Alec Baldwin, Penelope Ann Miller, Stephen Burham, and David Koepp, and I hope to get my hands on that at some point, but I wasn't able to make it happen for this review, sadly. Today we'll be capping off that series talking about the last movie to be made in the trend, 1996's The Phantom, starring Billy Zane, Christy Swanson, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and my boy, the worst Lord Raiden of all time, James Remar. And like a lot of other millennials out there, I've got a little bit of a soft spot for this movie in my heart. Even though it was a pretty big flop and is kind of mid, this was a movie that would play on cable and HBO or Showtime every 6 months or so, so even though I didn't own this movie as a kid, it's one that I've seen a lot. Maybe not as much as like The Shadow or The Rocketeer, but I did see this movie a lot as a kid. If there's one thing that makes The Phantom stand out, I think it's the way it looks. Cinematographer David Bird did a fantastic job shooting this thing. It's so rich and vibrant and does a good job of immersing you into the environment. But even cinematography aside, this movie has some really incredible set pieces, and I just love seeing practical sets like this. And finally, this movie has some really incredible stunt work going on. Shout out to both the stunt team and Billy Zane, because they really went the extra mile here, and I think it shows. But before we dive too deep into The Phantom, let's just take a moment to talk about the history of the Phantom as a character and how this movie came to be. Created in 1936 by Lee Falk, the Phantom began life as a comic strip, and the concept for the character feels very 1930s adventure comic strip. It kind of feels like the exact midpoint between adventure heroes like Tarzan versus actual superheroes like Batman and Superman. And plans to adapt the Phantom initially kicked off in 1989, and I think we all know why.
I'm Batman.
Anyway, initially famed spaghetti western director Sergio Leone was attached to write and direct The Phantom, even going so far as to have written a script and scouted locations. And goddamn, what I would give to see that version of this movie. I just think Leone's sensibilities would have really suited this kind of pulpy adventure story, but sadly Leone would leave the project before passing away shortly thereafter. And then Joe Dante was brought in to direct, and he got so far as to finish a script with Jeffrey Boehm that Dante described as, "I developed the script with the late Jeff Boehm, who wrote Inner Space, as a kind of spoof. We were a few weeks away from shooting in Australia when the plug was pulled over the budget and the presence of a winged demon. A year or so later, it was put back into production, sans demon. Only nobody seemed to notice that it was written to be funny, so it was disastrously played straight." And as a big fan of the Gremlins movies and Small Soldiers, I think it would have been really fun to see Dante's take on this material, especially if it had been played more as a comedy and less as a straight up action adventure movie. However, the job finally landed with Simon Windsor, who's mostly known for the movie Harlequin, the TV miniseries Lonesome Dove, and Free Willy. What a strange filmography this guy has. But honestly, based on his previous work, I can see why they picked him. He's someone that can balance heart and action at the same time, and as a lifelong fan of the Phantom comic strip, I think it seemed like like a no-brainer to give Windsor the job after Dante had to leave. Originally, the plan was to film the Phantom in Hawaii. However, it was discovered that would have put the budget $10 million above the $45 million budget that the Phantom had been given, so Windsor split production among 3 different places: Thailand, New York City, and Australia, where both Windsor and cinematographer David Burr are originally from. Isn't it crazy that film budgeting works that way, that it's cheaper to film in 3 different continents than it is to just film on one single island? You gotta love those tax breaks. And it wasn't until after Windsor joined the project that the role of the Phantom was finally cast and given to Billy Zane, who got fucking jacked to play this role. Apparently they had a foam muscle version of the suit made for Zane, but after taking one look at him, everyone agreed that he didn't need that suit at all, because I mean, look at this guy. So filming for the Phantom began in October of 95 and wrapped in February of 96, and it premiered just 4 months later to incredibly mixed reviews and a terrible box office. It debuted at number 6, making only $5 million domestically on its opening weekend. But did this movie actually deserve to flop? Is it a hidden masterpiece? Let's dive into the movie and find out. Okay, so The Phantom opens with one of the strangest title cards I've ever seen in a movie: "For those who came in late." What did I miss? And then we get a quick origin for how the Phantom came to be. Set in the early 16th century, we watch as a young boy is forced to watch his father be executed by an evil pirate gang captain named Kabai Sang of the Sang Brotherhood. So fun fact, in the comic strip, it's actually called the Singh Brotherhood, but this was changed to avoid offending people with the last name Singh. Probably a good call. Anyway, then the kid is taken in by the tribal people of Bengala, where he's washed ashore, and for whatever reason, they give him a skull ring and he becomes their protector. Let's be honest, it's a little messy and reeks of the mystical native trope of these types of adventure stories found in the first half of the 20th century. So anyway, this kid eventually goes on to become the first Phantom, and then this becomes a mantle that is passed down from father to son over the generations. And we do get this pretty sick title card. I genuinely think this still looks cool in like a 90s cool way. Anyway, after this, we're introduced to our secondary antagonist of the movie, Quill, played by James Remar. And we get this pretty fun little sequence of him and his men and their guide, which is a young local boy that they've kidnapped, and you can tell immediately that they don't give a shit about this kid. He's just an extra body to them, and it lets us know that these are the bad guys, and I like that. Okay, so real quick, like I said earlier, this movie was written by Jeffrey Boehm, who also wrote Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I mentioned this because this raid sequence in the tomb where Quill and his men are looking for the first skull really reminds me of the opening of Last Crusade, where the bad guys are looking for the Cross of Coronado. And speaking of that Indiana Jones connection, it just hit me that our MacGuffins in this movie, the 3 skulls of Tuganda, are pretty similar to the Sankara stones from Temple of Doom, but obviously the Phantom comic strip predates Temple of Doom. I don't know, I just thought it was interesting. So anyway, then we get our first shot of Billy Zane in his Phantom costume, and guys, I'm sorry, but this is such a silly fucking costume, but I like how he's just sitting in his giant concrete throne. Is this what he does all day? And I know that's a little nitpicky, but you can't deny that it's funny. And I think this is one of those moments that Joe Dante was talking about, likely written to be a joke, but then played completely straight in the final movie. Then we get this pretty fun little action sequence, and I like how James Remar just keeps repeating over and over that he's already killed this guy once before. And again, this entire action sequence is shot fantastically, and the stunt work here is honestly impressive, and we get our save the cat moment with the Phantom saving the young boy after these pieces of shit tried to kill him. And anyway, unfortunately, Quill gets away with the first skull. And we get our first scene of the Phantom out of costume, and we learn his real name is Kit Walker, and we also learn that he has a pre-existing relationship to Diana Palmer. But I do think it's interesting to think about the fact that Kit had a life. He went out into the world, he went to college, he formed relationships and friendships, all of which he had to just abandon to come back to Bengala to take over as the Phantom when his father was murdered, and that's pretty tragic. We then cut to New York and are introduced to Christy Swanson, aka Fake Buffy, as Diana Palmer, dressed in these generic adventure clothes so we know that she's adventurous right away, and her uncle, who owns the World Tribune newspaper, at a party being thrown at the Palmer Mansion. Fun fact, this is actually the Playboy Mansion. Apparently Hefner was a huge fan of the Phantom, and when production asked him if they could film his house, he jumped at the opportunity. So this is also where we're introduced to our main antagonist of the movie, Xander Drax. Great villain name, by the way. And we learn that Uncle Palmer is investigating him, and Drax vaguely threatens him, and it's kind of generic but fun. And just real quick, I don't think I've ever seen Treat Williams, who plays Drax, in anything else, even though he has a fuck ton of credits on IMDb. But he's so good at this role, he plays that really friendly but evil archetype incredibly well. He kind of reminds me of William H. Macy in just the slightest bit. Like, I like this guy, and I believe he likes everyone he meets right up until he murders them. It's a good vibe for a villain, especially in the context of this kind of story. So anyway, this is is where the main plot of the movie really kicks into gear, because Diana's uncle has discovered that Drax has a connection to this mysterious spiderweb symbol that we already know belongs to the Sang Brotherhood, and he sends Diana to Bengala to investigate further because reasons. And this is where we meet Sala, played by Catherine Zeta-Jones. Just real quick, I still can't believe that Catherine Zeta-Jones is Welsh. I literally spent my entire life thinking she was Spanish because of The Mask of Zorro, but that's a story for a completely different video. Anyway, Sala leads an all-female band of air pirates, and they're hired to kidnap Diana for Drax, which they do, but only until the Phantom shows up to rescue Diana. And I like how obvious it is to Sala that he's in love with her, and this entire sequence is really fun and well done. And again, just shout out to the stunt team here. So the Phantom rescues Diana and sends her right back to New York, and follows her back as Kid Walker, making his first appearance in Western society in 6 years. And I love the scene he has with Al, the cab driver. Actually, every time Al is on screen, it makes me happy. Like, I really love his reaction when Kit comes back to the taxi, and he's had the stones that Kit gave him appraised and is all, "Yes, sir, whatever you need, sir." It's great. And anyway, then we get this really awkward scene in Uncle Palmer's office when Diana comes in and sees Kit, and this is where we truly learn that these two used to date in college and that she's kind of pissed at him. I mean, she's happy to see him and know he's alive and okay, but she's also still pretty pissed at him for disappearing like he did. I like how this dum-dum is the one that tells them where the second skull is. By pure coincidence, he remembers one jade skull he saw in a collection at a museum on his 14th birthday, but whatever. Kit and Diana head to the museum, and I like how Kit just kind of lets his phantom nature take over here, and he smashes out the display and just snatches the skull. But Drax, Quill, Sala, and the rest of their goons show up and quickly snatch the skull from Kit. And then we get this scene where the skulls, when combined, begin to smoke, and then thank God the skulls could tell there was a map nearby, because the skulls then shoot a laser at the map to reveal the location of the third skull. And I like how Kit sneaks away and puts on his Phantom outfit, and not a single one of the bad guys is like, where did that Kit guy go? And we get another fantastic action sequence and car chase, and I love the scene with Kit talking to his dad in the back of Al's taxi, and Al is confused but is also like, that ain't my problem. And I fucking love the idea that Kit is able to ride on the pontoon of this plane from New York all the way to the Devil's Vortex, and there's no way that that flight was like less than 12 hours, but hey, what are you gonna do? Like his dad said,
it's the bottom of the ninth and you're 2 skulls behind.
So once we arrive to the Devil's Vortex, we're introduced to the OG Sang Brotherhood that hides out in the sick cave and sinks and robs ships that get too close to them. And one thing that kind of jumps out at me as strange is that from this point forward, Sala is kind of siding with Kit and Diana. I think it's just because she realized that she was on the wrong side, and that she and Diana were surrounded by a bunch of sketchy dudes, and there wasn't much they could do about that other than stick together. But I really like Sala after the turn, actually. And here's where we meet our second Mortal Kombat alum, Kari Hiroyuki Tagawa, who's the lead of the Sang Brotherhood here. And I also like this one Sang Brotherhood member that's dressed up like Smee from the animated Peter Pan movie. And from here we get the pretty standard third act negotiation scene. Drax shows up, says he wants the third skull. The pirates tell him that without the fourth skull, the 3 skulls are useless, which of course blows Drax's mind, because this is the first we've heard about a 4th skull. But we learn the 4th skull controls the other 3, and blah blah blah. We all know where it goes from here. Big action sequence. Bad guy gets all 3 skulls and understands the massive power they hold. Unfortunately for him, he doesn't understand that the 4th skull just so happens to be the Phantom skull ring he's always wearing. So Drax gets blown up, and that's pretty much the end of our third act action set piece. We then get a fairly standard epilogue where the Phantom takes Diana into his lair and begins to tell her about the history of the Phantom, etc. But he still doesn't reveal that he's actually Kit under the mask. And as he takes Diana to meet Sala, she reveals that she figured out it was Kit under the mask a long time ago. He takes his mask off, they kiss, she flies home, and I just love how they shot him taking the mask off and how his eye makeup completely disappears. Apparently Zane found it too uncomfortable to have hair while in the Phantom suit, so they shot this scene at 2 separate times, once before Zane shaved his head and once after he shaved his head, where he's in full costume. The movie does kind of tease out possible future adventures for the Phantom. I mean, it's easy to see how that might have looked. He and Diana may kiss at the end of this, but she also leaves the island, so that's really the main open thread, but still. So almost 30 years later, what is the Phantom's legacy? Well, I think it's one of those movies that if you saw it at the right age, aka you're a millennial born somewhere between 1988 and 1995, you probably caught this movie on cable or had it on VHS and thought it was the sickest movie ever. And I do think it has quite a bit of charm to it. I mean, they really just don't make movies like this anymore. Shot on location with real actors and real animals and real sets built by real people. Not to mention all of the incredible stunt work done in this movie is truly impressive, and this movie just looks like $1 million. I've been watching a lot of older movies lately lately, and I think I've landed on like 1985 to 2005 being the era where movies looked the absolute best. And I mean that the film stock, lenses, and cameras were all kind of the height of what could be accomplished through analog mediums. But let me know if you disagree in the comments. Maybe I'll do a whole video trying to nail down when movies stopped looking like movies and started looking like shitty car commercials. But anyway, The Phantom. I'd say this movie is more or less forgotten in the larger sense of movie history and superhero movies in general, unless again you were a kid that owned it on VHS and was obsessed with it. And I'm just gonna say it, while I think Billy Zane is a little one note in this role, I think he kind of nails it all the same. It has that unrelenting optimism found in a lot of the comic strips from the 1930s, and it makes me happy that this movie didn't shy away from that, because I think we all know that if this movie was made today, we'd get a really dark take on the character where it opens with Kit witnessing his father being killed, and his suit would be a little bit darker so that he could blend into the night more, because let's be real, like 60% of the movie would end up taking place at night in the jungle or something. I guess back in 2008 there were plans to get a sequel going and bring back all of the original cast, but then that slowly morphed into a reboot which fell apart in 2014, and since then there really hasn't been any information on a new movie based on the Phantom being in the works, and I would be curious to see how a Phantom movie would be received these days. I think if Paramount were able to avoid making it either a quippy Marvel movie or a grimdark DC movie, they might actually have something. I think people are getting really tired of both the quippy and ultra serious superhero stories. We've seen the superhero deconstructed enough. We get it. So if Paramount came out with a light, fun adventure movie based on the Phantom, I don't know, it might do kind of well. It's hard to say, especially with the industry in its current state of IP-driven movies either bombing or setting records at the box office. But let me know in the comments, do you guys think a reboot of the Phantom would do well? Is that something you'd like to see? Would you want to see Billy Zane come back? I know I would.
If you've made it this far into the video, thank you for watching, and as always, a very special thank you to my supporters on Patreon. You all keep this channel going. If you'd like to join the Patreon, there's a link in the description below. Patrons get early ad-free access to videos, access to an exclusive Discord server, and they get to help me choose what movies get covered on the channel. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video. I mean, if you've made it this far into the video, I think it's safe to say you liked it, so it really would mean the world if you'd hit those buttons. Born to Rant is a completely independent channel, and I release new videos covering all of your favorite movies every Thursday at 7 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.